Kenya has set its revenue collection target for the 2017-2018 financial year at 1.7 trillion shillings. The amount is equivalent to 26% of the country's GDP. Rajesh Shah is a senior tax partner at PwC, and he joins us now to discuss the tax measures and whether this target is too ambitious for the Kenyan government. Let's look at the tax measures that came out of this budget, and we'll start with the income tax. The tax bands have been expanded by 10% for yet another year. What's going to be the impact of this, especially to the low-income earners? And in your opinion, has there been any impact for the last 9 months that we've operated within this kind of environment?
Obviously, the impact of the previous change which was made would have started from January this year. What that has done is obviously looked at the people who are low earning employed. It really affects those guys who are earning less than what I call 400,000 shillings a year. So right now they don't have to pay tax, yeah. So it gives a bit of extra shillings in their pockets. And what will happen, this change which has been proposed now will happen for 2018. So the impact of it will be felt next year rather than this year. And I think it doesn't have that much of an impact on government revenues, but it does have a significant impact on people earning at those levels. And therefore, they have a few more shillings to spend.
Let's look at yet another initiative where the government is trying to lower the cost of living, and now maize flour and bread VAT exempt. What's the impact of this, especially when we are looking at a situation whereby food inflation is at 16.5% last month?
Yeah, obviously, I think what the move is responding to that, particularly around maize. We've got a drought in the country that's accepted, but it's not only in the country, but it's in the region, yeah? So what the government is saying, we need to cushion that. And one of the ways is the cushioning, for example, maize by allowing imports to come duty-free for at least 4 months, and plus the maize meal which will be made will be now zero-rated. So effectively that means that the input which the manufacturings were suffering, they'll now be able to recover. So you won't see a straight away 16% reduction in the price of maize meal. What you will see is maybe a 7-8% reduction. It depends on the input VAT, which they will now be able to recover instead of including it as part of the price of the maize meal. So don't expect suddenly that inflation, food-related inflation will come down significantly. It will certainly start coming down slightly, but not by bringing it down to single digits again.
How do you see this being implemented, the clarity? Because we've seen the same thing with fuel, for example. When fuel prices come down, the consumers will say, we don't think we are getting the right gap drop that's expected. So in terms of that clarity and making sure that these prices go down all the way to the consumer, how do you think that will be implemented?
Fuel is slightly different. Remember, the fuel adjustments which you see by the regulatory body are basically pegged on the price of oil itself. In terms of taxes, they are flat in terms of the overall price. So it's nothing to do with what the government can do in terms of flight. So what I think the regulatory authority is obviously trying to do is manage the change in a gradual way, either up or down. But in terms of what they've done in terms of zero-rating maize or bread, we should start seeing that impact as soon as the measures are effective, and I believe the target date of the change is 1st July this year. So we should actually start seeing that impact coming through immediately, because any tax manufacturers and whatever would have paid on the inputs, they should be able to get relief from that under the mechanisms they are in the VAT Act. If we don't, I think the Cabinet Secretary was quite clear what he will take measures to make sure either to go back and saying no longer these exemptions are available, or find out why the changes are not happening in the price of the final finished goods themselves.
What do you think was in the mind of the government when they said that for any new vehicle manufacturers coming to the country, you pay a corporate tax of 15% as opposed to 30% for the first 5 years?
I think it's to encourage people to come and assembly, and he was quite clear, it's not only for assembly for Kenya, but it's to encourage assembly for the regional market here. So he wants to actually attract people as new investors to start a new activity. Yes, we've got existing assemblers and everything, but it's to encourage new economic activity. So it's part of the agenda of creating more jobs or which is one of the themes the government has as part of its midterm plan, which is ending this year.
Do you think the impact of inflation adjustment, excise tax on beer and spirits, do you think that's going to impact significantly on that industry? Because we've seen EABL, for example, which is the largest brewer in the country and in the region, say that for the last 2 years, their revenue on beer has been flat in Kenya because of the excise duty.
Yes, so Charles, I think on that one, there are two aspects to this. One, I think the impact came because the excise rates were changed when we came out with the new Excise Act itself. So that's the impact they're talking about. But what the government actually committed to was when it comes to specific rates, not only for cigarettes or beers, for any goods which are subject to specific rates, including drinks, carbonated drinks, juices and everything, will be subject to an annual inflation adjustment. My expectation was they should have done that last year. They didn't, because the new act came in December 2015. So they are doing this for the first time. And what the interest to see is what the responsibilities for the Commissioner General of KRA to come out with the notice saying this is the inflationary adjustment, and it's laid down clearly in the law how that should be computed. So I would not expect an increase of more than 10% looking at the consumer index statistics from December 2015 to June 2017.
Mm-hmm. And do you find the measure to increase the gambling taxes to 50% counterproductive, because this is a young industry? Maybe if it's allowed to grow and taxed when it's grown, there'll be more revenue coming out of it, as opposed to doing a move that many people are thinking it's literally being killed, so to speak.
Yes, I think it's a fine balancing act. I think it's a proposal by the Cabinet Secretary. I think it does look high, and when we do a comparative to our neighbors, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, it certainly is 50% is on the higher side. And I'm sure if the idea is to say that this industry is not, this economic type of activity is not something we want to encourage, and we need to minimize it, then the government thinking might be right, but depends on the point of view you have. But if it's an activity which will continue regardless, then I think they have to let that industry mature and then come out with a sensible way of taxing it.
There are the winners, the losers when it comes to how the tax measures were applied, but the revenue target generation of 1.7 trillion, what do you think about that? Is it ambitious? Because we've set lower targets before and we've not met them.
Yes, you might say they've not met them, but if you see year on year, there's a growth in tax revenue. Because remember, as a country, Kenya relies on tax revenues for its expenditure. So on year end, we are doing very well. I mean, our revenues are growing more than the economic growth in the country. Yes, so yes, obviously, certainly, the CES has set up an ambitious target of 1.7 trillion. For the revenue to collect from ordinary revenues as per se. In a way, I think that is going to come through two or three things, the way I see it. Obviously, natural economic growth will contribute to growth in revenues. And the other one will be really around the activities administratively the revenue authority is taking in terms of revenue leakage. I think the CS alluded in not only this year but previous years about some of the technology type of initiatives the KRA is taking, particularly around customs and also around ITEX. And also, so the whole idea is to actually to stop revenue leakage, which basically means that if people are not paying income tax, they should start paying income tax to actually bring that compliance better. And also from consumer taxes like VAT, if people are collecting VAT and not paying it over, soon I think there's enough systems and technologies which the revenue authority is coming out where people will not have the ability to do those things. So that revenue will actually come from less leakages now happening in the country in terms of revenues.
Mm-hmm. And do you think the Kenya Revenue Authority is well empowered in terms of resources, capacity to implement some of these strategies? Because we've talked about taxing the informal sector, but we've not seen that become a major contributor to the tax revenue.
But if you go and look at the strategic plan of the Revenue Authority, they actually are looking at how to tax the informal sector. And it's clear you cannot tax it in the same way as you tax the formal sector, yeah? Informality requires informality. So I'm sure the way we are Kenyans will come out some innovative ways of taxing the informal sector in an informal way. So I can clearly see that happening. And so it's not about capacity building. It's about using the right technology tools in terms of mobile telephony and everything to collect revenue from that sector.
All right. Finally, let's talk about the kind of borrowing that we are going to have to, to fill the gap that our revenue can't meet, 560 billion shillings. The issue of borrowing is very topical right now, whether we get into that threshold. What do you think? Do we still have much gap to play with when you talk about sustainability of debt?
Certainly, I think if you talk at economists, which I'm not, Charles, but they will say our debt is still, as a percentage of GDP, is still sustainable. We are in the 50s, but as a middle income country, we could be actually borrowing up to 70%. So sustainability is not really the question I would be posing. The question would be, is this borrowing necessary? Can the government be doing enough in terms of smart around expenditure, make sure there are no leakages coming from expenditure? Can the government be doing smart around revenue collection so that, that we can meet that target of 1.7 billion? Yes, even if we are smart, my view would be borrowing is necessary, particularly if you're using that to fund development expenditure, because remember, it's the future generations which will benefit from that development expenditure in a way of more economic activity. Now, it is only fair that the future generations themselves pay for that to repayments of those borrowings. So in a way, the question is, yes, it's sustainable, but the question is, government should also be focusing on, be smart about expenditure, be smart about revenue collection. But borrowing definitely is something a country should do, because particularly to fund development expenditure, because it's for the benefit for future generations.